Okay, welcome everyone again. And we're back in Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers. And we've been going at a nice, I want to say a snail's pace. That wouldn't be nice, but we've been going in depth. We've been doing a thorough understanding of this Mishnah, this teaching of our sages. And truth is, it deserves the slow pace because there's so much richness and so much depth. So let's just jump in where we left off. Last week we talked about a bit of the transmission, what it looked like, the oral Torah, because at the end of last week's Torah reading, it went back into detail of the story of Mount Sinai, and it described everything that Moses was given at Mount Sinai. And we mentioned that, for example, if you open up a tractate of the Talmud nowadays, it's full of discussions, arguments, analyzations by rabbis who are named. You have Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Shimon. You have, all the rabbis that are named. So if Moses got the Torah at Mount Sinai, it didn't exist yet, right? God gave Moses everything at Mount Sinai, all the written Torah, all the oral Torah. So what's with all the rabbis that are named in the Talmud? So we discussed that and all the cases that they brought in the Talmud, right? So we discussed last week that the transmission of the oral Torah was the message is the main thing. The message is the main thing, and the medium could change. Meaning the case studies that Moses used to teach the people in the desert, the laws, were not necessarily the case studies that were taught that we have in our Talmud, because he had to teach them in a language that they could understand in order to understand the bottom line. And those rabbis didn't exist that are in the Talmud at the time. So Moses is going to be quoting Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and all these were great rabbis, but they're not alive. Who's he quoting? People are going to say, who is that, Moshe? And he's like, oh, he's going to live in about, just give it 2,000 years, they'll be around. Didn't work like that, right? Because the Talmud was eventually canonized and was written down, and that's what we have today. And it's immutable, it's unchangeable. But the message has to be given across, and the means that you use to do it, that can change. Now, even today, if I'm studying a piece of Talmud with a student and he doesn't understand the case that we're learning, I can give another analogy, another metaphor, another case, and that's perfectly fine, because that becomes a medium to give over the Jewish law, which is immutable. And we talked about that the Torah given from Moses in Mount Sinai, right? What was he given in the written Torah? Because if he was given the full Torah at Mount Sinai that says, down the line in the desert, Moses is going to send spies to the land of Israel, and they're going to give a bad report, and the people are going to cry, and therefore they're not going to get to go in the land of Israel. And Moses hits the rock instead of speaks to the rock, and he doesn't go in the land of Israel. So Moses, just look at the book God gave you, read it, and say, you know what? I'm not going to hit the rock. I'm not going to send the spies. So obviously, he wasn't given that part at Mount Sinai. So he was given at Mount Sinai all the principles and all the laws and the way to derive the laws. And the written Torah, he was given everything from the first word in the beginning, Bereshit, up until the story at Mount Sinai. That was all written down right there. And as they progressed on their journey in the desert for the next 40 years, so God would say to Moses in the 10th meeting, Moses, time to write this down, time to write that down. So at the point where we are reading about Moses sending spies, he's up to having written that in the Torah, because it's not written yet if he's going to send them. He has a free choice. He's going to make that decision, right? And he's going to eventually write it down when God tells him to. So this is a little bit of how the written Torah was given. And up until the Talmud discusses who wrote the last, I believe, 7 verses of the Torah, because Moses was not alive anymore. And the Torah is called Torah's Moshe, the Torah of Moses. So did he write the whole thing to the end? Did his disciple Joshua write it to the end? Did Moses write it in like blockchain? All the letters were together, and then God eventually told them how to split it up to read the sentence. There's different opinions, different discussions, and it's for another time. But it's an interesting point. And the reason I a little bit want to talk about Moshe again, class devoted to him, is because today was the anniversary of the passing and the birth of Moses, of Moshe Rabbeinu. Zayin Adar. Right now it's evening time where I am, so it's Ches, it's the 8th. But the 7th day of Adar is when Moshe was born and when he passed. Now we'll have another month next month also, because it's a leap year. We'll have Adar number 2, and we'll celebrate that day again. So today's a day to connect to Moshe and his Torah and his teachings. And I'll just say right now, because it's popping in my head now. I said I'll wait to the end, but I saw a nice idea brought from a great Hasidic master. His name was Rav Nachum from Chernobyl. He was one of the early disciples of the Maggid of Mezrich, who was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. So we're talking about really the 3rd generation of the Hasidic leaders, masters. And he has a book called Me'or Einayim. And just a fascinating idea. He says that based on mystical sources, that Haman wanted to destroy the Jewish people, and he made a raffle, made a lottery, came out in this month, Adar, and take care. And he came out this month, and Haman was happy. Haman was happy. He said, "Oh, the month that the Jewish people's leader passed away, excellent." So what he didn't realize was Moses was also born on this day. So the Me'or Einayim says that, what does it mean that Moses was born on that day? So the normal way of thinking of a life cycle is a person's born, right? Obviously, and then he passes at the end. The Me'or Einayim says, no, look at it this way. Haman didn't realize that Moses, he was born obviously once on the 7th day. And then 120 years later, he died that day. And Haman said, great, he died that day. Beautiful. Now it's my chance to get the Jews. But what he didn't realize was the very day that he passes away, from that moment on, there's, so to speak, a rebirth of Moshe Rabbeinu. Because the mystical sources say that Moses' soul was an all-inclusive soul that was inclusive of all the 600,000 root souls of the Jewish people. And when he passed, those sparks were ignited and caught on and were embedded in the souls of the rest of the Jewish people. So although he passes today, he still is carried on in the hearts and the souls and the minds, the collective body of the Jewish people. And it's like it's born and it continues to stay with us. So anyway, so we're on the next day. So each Jew, we have a spark of Moshe inside of us that is really from the the subconscious part of us that and the superconscious, if you will, that part of our soul that stood at Mount Sinai, and that Moses taught us the Torah, and that it's inside of us, so we can connect. So today's the day to carry on with that. Anyway, this Mishnah continues now with the sayings of the men of the Great Assembly. So once again, we've mentioned that these men of the Great Assembly are the 120 prophets and sages headed by Ezra the scribe at a Great Assembly following their what's called Aliyah, when they came up from Babylon. Right, they were exiled. The first temple was destroyed. 70 years they were in Persia, Babylon, Persia, Media. And then at the end of the 70 years is when the Purim story happened, the miraculous salvation. And a year or so later, the Jews went up back to the land of Israel, led by Ezra the scribe, and rebuilt the second temple. We mentioned that among the original members of those 120 men were some great people, prophets themselves, who are Chagai, Zechariah, to name a few, Malachi, Zerubbabel, Mordechai was one of them, Mordechai from the story of Purim. He was on that 120 group, and Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So those sages were the ones that faced the challenge of rebuilding and refortifying Jerusalem and Judaism, not just Jerusalem, but Judaism. They had to rebuild Judaism after the upheaval and assimilation that was caused by the Babylonian exile. We know that, in such a challenging place, that the Jews came back and there was intermarriage. One of the first things Ezra does when he comes with a contingency of Jews back to Jerusalem, he exhorts them and says, guys, it's 70 years exile. There's intermarriage. You have to, this is not what God wants, right? And you have to separate from those marriages if they're intermarriages. And the people repented and people changed, and they did. But we see after 70 years, they had this challenge. And this is back then, between the first temples. I mean, all the more so we see what's happening in our days, in our time, 2,000 years into exile of assimilation, of intermarriage, and the challenges we face today. So it's not a new phenomena, but it's one that needs repair. We have to stand strong in our Judaism and our identities and follow the Torah, to the best of our ability. Doesn't matter what the circumstances are. That's what's our job. And so they had this challenge then, this struggle, and these men of the Great Assembly, these 120 people, had the first time of really refortifying Judaism. So probably if they had those challenges then, and these are the three sayings they had, we should learn those lessons and try to apply it nowadays. This might be the remedy to strengthen Judaism now. So what they did was basically, it was called restoring the crown. That's how our sages describe it. They restored God's crown to its original glory. And it's referenced in the following, that Moses in the Torah, in the 5th book of the Torah, Devarim, he calls God, and we're familiar with these words, he's Hakel, Hagodol, Hagibor, Vanoira, the great, strong, and awesome God. And the Talmud says, it brings a story actually, that there was once a person praying, he was leading the prayers, and his rabbi was standing there, and the student went, and he had a whole list of praises, Hakel, Hagodol, Hagibor, Other, He was just going on and on and on, said 10 or so, 15 praises. And when he finished, everyone's like, that was unique. So the rabbi said to him, "Oh, did you finish saying all of the praises of your master?" Meaning, with that's he was being very sharp, and he says, "You think you can tell all the praises of God?" He says, "If not for Moses in the Torah saying these three praises of God specifically, we would have no right, no goal, no audacity to say any praises. We could pick out the correct praises of God. God's infinite. We don't know the end of." God's infinite. How can you start with praises? How can you finish with praises? So the fact that Moshe chose these three, because Moshe knew these meant something and he could say them. And God said, "You're right. Say these." We say them in prayer every day, 3 times a day. So what's unique is, though, these three things, at some point, the prophets stopped using them. Because they said, look what the Jewish people have gone through. Look at the turmoil. Look at the exile and the degradation and the just tragedy. So Jeremiah saw the destruction. Yirmiyah saw the destruction of the temple. And he said, where is foreigners are walking or trampling, reveling in God's palace? They've smashed it down, and a fox is coming out where the Holy of Holies used to be. Where's his awesomeness? It doesn't exist. It's gone. So he stopped saying awesome, Naira. Daniel came along and he said, foreigners are enslaving his children. Where is God's strength? So he stopped calling him a strong God. So it wasn't that God changed, God forbid. It's our perception of God's strength and his awesomeness. We couldn't perceive it anymore. So he said, if we can't perceive it, why are we calling it then? We say things we can perceive, and we don't perceive this, so let's stop saying it. So come the men of the Great Assembly, and they said, to the contrary. No, the persecution itself is an expression of God's strength and his awesomeness. Why? Because if not for God's awesomeness, how could a solitary nation endure among the nations who seek its destruction? It wouldn't be possible. So they returned the crown to its former glory and said, the great, strong, and awesome God. This is what a piece of Talmud says. So the very fact, that also God's praised by his strength, that he could, hold back and watch this happen, so to speak. No, guys, I'm going to let it happen. I love the Jewish people like you can't imagine, more than more than you could ever fathom. Like a father, more than a father loves his son. There's an intimate, essential attachment that the Jewish people have to me and to the Torah. And when I see them in pain, the Talmud says, God says, I'm in pain. He suffers with us. A person has a headache. God says, my head hurts, so to speak. You stub your toe. God says, that pains me that you're in pain. So the fact that he could watch us suffer, he could be there with us in our suffering and not say anything, that's a lot of strength. So that proves that there's strength. So ultimately, the men of the Great Assembly were able to infuse us with the proper perspective and align us with our faith in God, that he runs the show and he's with us. And therefore, the Jews will say, you know what, you're right. We'll call them those names again. Great and strength and strong. So once again, it was their responsibility to address the upheaval right, of the generation and the exile that they faced, and to apply Torah law in actual practice now, because they were taking the teaching that we had and said, now we're going to have to implement them with expression despite the persecution. So let's see some of the application over here. We mentioned last week that there was, I just want to see what I said over here. Someone have a question? Anyone? Good. So interesting thing over here, part of the application process, right? Let's just go through real quick what happened. There's 4 stages basically of Torah study, can be divided into 2. So there's preparations and foundations for study, right? Symbolized by Moshe and Joshua, Moses and Joshua, which is like humility and devotion. Those are 2 basic aspects a person needs. He needs humility. I don't know everything, and I have to be devoted to learning, to study. Because study itself is symbolized by elders and prophets, which can be represented of full comprehension and spiritual awareness, right? Elders are people that hopefully after a lifetime of working and toiling, they're going to have full comprehension. And spiritual awareness, a prophet, he's highly aware and has an intimate connection and relationship with God. So that's spiritual awareness. In those 4 steps, there's only 2 entities though. There's a Torah and its student. But the 5th step is alluded to by the Great Assembly. A 3rd entity is introduced, which is the world, because a world that conceals God's awesomeness and greatness. There used to be a revealed aspect. Obviously, there's Moshe and there's Joshua and the elders and the prophets. Everything, godliness is revealed and open. But comes the men of the Great Assembly and things are concealed. So the Torah student duplicates the path of the men of the Great Assembly by learning to apply the wisdom of the Torah even to a place of divine concealment. This is a novelty. And furthermore, to find divinity in the concealment, which is really our job nowadays, right? In the darkness, but realizing in the darkness, that's where God is. He didn't go anywhere. It's just our perception. So when we can extract the light from the darkness itself, it transforms the darkness. You say it was never darkness. It was always light. I just didn't see it. I didn't perceive it. So that's what all challenges are. That's what all struggles are, is trying to extract the kernel of truth from there, that God is there. This started by the men of the Great Assembly, and they prepare us, they pave the way. And that's what their teachings really are about. We'll see in a moment. So it's through this challenge that the student truly understands Torah. When Torah has to be applied practically, and it's no longer theoretical, the student makes sure to get it right and reaches the truth and essence of the Torah's meaning. Because now I got to do it. It's like step up to the plate. No more messing around. So the uniqueness of these 3 dictums of the men of the Great Assembly constitute the formula for perpetuating the Torah. And those 3 things are what we mentioned last week. And they are: be patient in judgment, raise many disciples, and make a protective fence for the Torah. So last week we talked about a message of being patient for judges, not to rush to hand down a ruling based on your first assumption. And for leaders, don't rush to judge your flock harshly. Be patient with them. Consider, the state that the people are in, the concealment they're going through, and that's why they act the way they do. And finally, for educators, not to judge individual characters of your students and customize a path of development for each one in particular, right? Raise many disciples. You are like this. You are like this. You have talents like this. See the uniqueness of everybody and show them how to serve God. God made everyone with different faces, different mindsets. The Talmud says, just like no 2 people's face is the same, so too no people's disposition, no people's mind are the same. And a great Hasidic leader, I believe, I saw recently, I don't know, maybe the leaders of the Gur, we pronounce it Ger, movements. He said, just like a person doesn't get mad, I don't get mad at you if your nose looks different than my nose, right? So too, I shouldn't get mad if you think differently than me. What can I do? That's why God made me. He made you like this, right? You don't care if someone has a different type of smile, different shade of color of skin or hair, their face looks different. Yeah, that's you. I'm happy you're you, and I'm happy I'm me. So just like we're okay with our physical differences, so too we have to be okay with the way we think is different, right? Everyone, as long as we're in the parameters, like this box, you're in the box of Jewish law. We all follow the same laws. Great. You're amazing. You have different personality traits, different ways of thinking, different, strengths, different weaknesses. That's amazing. We have to respect each person. You have a different personality. That's how God made you. So we have to learn how to express it in Judaism itself and in the world, whatever those talents are. That's why we have doctors, we have lawyers, we have mathematicians, we have chefs, we have artists, musicians, because God made you with unique talents. You got to use them to serve Him. So that's what it means. Judge the individual character of students, customize a path of development, personal growth for each one in particular. And we have to find that person that can help us do that. So raise many disciples. So when the Mishnah says this, it's actually coming to negate views that are expressed in the Talmud in different places. Because Reb Gamliel, one time, he was a leader of Jewish people, and he wasn't so into raising many disciples. He said if the students were not completely pious, if their inside was not like their outside, meaning if their internal side was not a reflection of how they acted, like he didn't align properly, he says you can't become part of my group. I want the cream of the crop. I'm looking for the elitists to come in to my academy. If you fit, good. If not, not. So he was actually taken out of office for a short time, and when he was taken out, and never the leader was put in place, he opened the door. He said, just come, yeah, come, everyone come. And he added tons and tons of seats to the study hall. So this Mishnah follows that opinion. Yeah, raise many disciples, right? Whose true selves they'll develop. They'll become who they are. If it's not who they are right now, it's okay. You'll find their way. It also negates the school of Shammai. We've heard of Hillel and Shammai, the two main schools. So it also, raising many disciples negates them, because they said you should only accept a student who is wise, humble, and pedigreed. So, but nevertheless, our Mishnah endorses the view of his contemporary Hillel, who said, teach every person, since there were many wayward individuals who were welcome to Torah study and emerged saintly, pious, and upright. So we want to give every Jew the opportunity to study Torah, because we're all, a portion of our souls are connected to Hashem. So we all have an opportunity to connect and really, there's no telling what one person could do. It was a famous statement that rings in my head that a great rabbi, his name was Shimon Schwab. He was a great leader of German Jewry, and he left before World War II, came to the Lower East Side, I believe, opened a synagogue. He was a great, very articulate person and a great scholar. And he wrote that he laments the fact that more of his friends growing up, or people that he didn't even, not friends, but people that were not religious, didn't have the opportunity to study, because he says, I'm certain there would have been many more that would have been greater than me, would have succeeded and done more than me. I just know, like, he was humble, obviously, but he's saying that Jews are nuclear powered souls. And just because that Jew is right now is not lit up, doesn't mean he would light him up. He would just change the world and turn it over. Maybe more than I'm capable of doing. We have to be appreciative that we're in. We got in. We know about it. We got to try to share that light with others, because there's no telling what one more person can add on. That's what he's got inside of him. So that's the opinion of Hillel. A true leader, the Lubavitch Rebbe says, who wishes to perpetuate the Torah, he's got to recognize the challenges his would-be students face and then judge them favorably. Because you want to elevate people. You want to inspire them. You want to give them encouragement. You don't want to look at, forget, you're not part of it. No. Look at the challenges they're facing, try to help them, try to lift them up. So the true leader is going to raise many students, finding merit even in those that appear to be meritless. Give them merit. Help them grow. Help them connect. Build them up. Invest yourself in them. Many Jews also, the Rambam writes that this extends to non-Jews as well, because he writes that we are charged with teaching the 7 basic laws of morality to the entire world. They're called the 7 universal mitzvos, or commandments, right? Noach, he was not Jewish, but God gave him 7 laws. So the whole world has a code of morality that the Torah wants you to follow. So we have to be teaching everyone at every moment, every opportunity, every meeting, every encounter is an opportunity to bring light and to, show a person that they have importance and they're there for a reason. And there's a way to live. And there's absolute morality. And there's absolute truth. And to try to teach that to people. That's our function. So this is what a leader wants to do. And everyone has that little spark of a leader inside of them. And has the opportunity. We have opportunities day by day. So the precise wording of this raise many students also conveys another lesson. That raise, once again, why does it say raise many students? Like lift up. So it means the authentic leader does not teach and move on. He doesn't say, I teach, here's the lesson, next. So, no, he raises the student like a flame that it's coddled until it can stand on its own, until it catches on its own and it starts to burn on its own. You don't have to hold the match by the wick anymore. Hold there for a second. Oh, you caught wick? Okay, now you can go. I'm not moving until you catch fire, until you start moving on your own. I gotta light the fire inside of you so you can take that flame, cultivate it, and then continue to pass it on. That can only be achieved when the teacher recognizes the individual needs of the student. Right? It's important to have a mentor, have a rebbe, have any person in your life that can help you like that. Recognize your individual needs, your strengths, and help cultivate them and bring them out. The word said raise many students. Why many? There's no minimum to many. In Hebrew, there's different ways of saying the word. It could have said rabim, which means many, but in the minimum is 2. So it could have been a mistaken interpretation that, yeah, raise 2 students. That's many. And you fulfilled your obligation. And so it says no. A true educator, he's never satisfied. More students, more. I'll teach more. You have an opportunity to teach. Okay, of course I want it. You want to seek them out until each of his students is going to fulfill that dictum and find students of their own and keep passing on. Create the chain, more links in the chain. And then disciples, the leader can't be satisfied with students that merely attend the lectures, right? You can't just show up and, okay, that's enough, right? Though these are not students, they're an audience. This is what, this is the Rebbe says. The leader must seek and develop disciples to whom he is their devoted mentor, right? It's not just like we're here as like to have a good show, have some popcorn and see, that's it, turn it off, we're done, right? It's got to be a person that's invested in those that he's communicating Torah with, and those people want to be invested with him, right? They're there for them. It's a relationship, as we've seen the whole time. The Torah is the true leader he's invested with his students, and I heard a lot of stories this week about that, and unfortunately we have so much time now to share them, but maybe another time. But we see this time and time again with leaders, that they're so invested in the happiness and the unhappiness, so to speak, of their students or their flock, that they feel physical pain when other people are in pain, and they'll do anything for them physically and spiritually to help them. That's a true relationship of a Rebbe and a student. Now it says to make a fence for the Torah. There's a very nice explanation over here. So making a fence for the Torah means additional enactments beyond Torah law that serve as a buffer zone to keep a person from transgressing the Torah, right? Like, for example, if there's a bonfire, you don't go like within 5 feet. You say, okay, this is the line I'll go up to. I'm not going to go near the embers of the burning wood or the rocks that are encircling the fire pit. I'm staying much further back because a fire can burn. It hurts. You don't want to go near it. So that's what the rabbinic enactments are the Torah saying over here. Make a fence for the Torah. Don't come too close, to certain averas, certain sins are dangerous. You don't want to go near them. So we set boundaries so we don't even come close to them. So listen to this analogy. It's very nice. Innovation in Torah. It's called over here, the setting. It's paragraph I want to read to you. In every relationship, there are clearly stated desires and those that are only alluded to. In a relationship between 2 people. You know what I want, and a person can hint to other things that they want. And it is by recognizing and fulfilling those unspoken desires that each partner expresses his or her true love. A husband and wife. A wife says, I want, a husband says, I need this, and a wife says, I want this. And there's certain things that they know that each other need, certain essential needs. There's certain things that are only hinted to, or with a father and a son. The father says, there's certain things I want in this relationship, certain respect, certain, way of someone else speaking. Oh, okay. I thought someone was asking a question. But those unspoken desires really are the way that true love is expressed. So, a father that, he comes home from work every day, let's say he takes off his shoes, he puts on his slippers, he goes down, he has a cup of coffee, and he, reads takes a certain book he likes. So he might do that himself, right? He never asked his kid to do it. But just by the fact that I see my father does it every day, I get it. He likes it. He loves that. You know what? Maybe I should just do it. And if you do it without being asked, it's like your father says, wow, I never even asked you to do it. You did that for me. You must really care about me. You see that it means something to me and I like it. You did it without being asked. You must really love me. Right? You come home, your wife made you supper because she knows it's your favorite dinner. I didn't ask. You must love me. right? Yeah, so we express a closeness when we do things for a person that we don't have to ask for it, because it's just expressing that unspoken desire. So it is with the relationship between God and man. In the Torah, God tells us what he wants in very explicit terms. Then there are inner desires that he leaves for us to discover through our understanding of Torah and our love for him. These are the mitzvahs and traditions that the Jewish people have added to the Torah over time, according to the guidelines, of course, that we've spoken about, that were given at Mount Sinai. So in fact, God, he treasures our fulfillment of those mitzvahs that we've discovered more than those he revealed in the Torah. This is an explanation of the Rebbe, and based on the Maharal, a great medieval sage, that when we put up safeguards for the Torah, we're saying, God, your Torah is so precious to us. We care about it so much. We don't want to, God forbid, make a mistake. We're putting a boundary so we don't do something wrong. And that expresses an inner love that we have and an inner desire to fulfill what God wants. It's not just like we're trying to make it harder or we're trying to do. No, we're showing, it's a way to show love and closeness to Hashem. Finally, the first and last phrases of the Mishnah complement another. Try to finish the Mishnah off, and we're going a little overtime today. I hope you don't mind. Maybe make up a little for last week. But let's just try to finish off, get a conclusion to this first Mishnah if we can. So the Mishnah began with Moses' reception of the Torah from Mount Sinai. How does one perpetuate this Torah? By making a fence around it. So too, in each generation, the Torah student cannot be satisfied with what he has received from the past, going all the way back to Moses. He has to strive constantly to apply the Torah in accordance with the needs of the generation. Right? It's continuous. In creating these fences, however, the student must remain faithful to the rules and codes that Moses received at Sinai and passed on to Joshua. So we see from beginning to end, it's about the transmission, but also remaining faithful to everything that we've been given from Moses at Mount Sinai. And finally, making a fence can also mean that, especially when teaching the Torah, a person has to make a fence around their words and be sensitive to the audience, right? When we're communicating ideas to people, to know who we're talking to. Carefully choose the appropriate content, the length, the time, and place for the teaching, right? And don't defeat your own purpose and by irritating the listeners, which I hope I haven't done tonight. I hope I've chosen a message that was appropriate in content, length, time, place. Didn't step on my own toes, right? So this is like for everyone, because we get excited about Torah teachings. We get excited about an idea and we want to share with family, with friends, a neighbor, whoever it is, a coworker. But sometimes it's not, they don't need to hear exactly that. We have to be sensitive and try to choose the right way to communicate God's messages, because we want everyone to enjoy. We see it's beautiful. We see it's great. We see it's real. We want to give over that authenticity to others. So we got to think. We got to use our good judgment, and hopefully we'll have the divine assistance to give over the Torah in a way that makes it not just palatable but enjoyable and pleasurable to those that we are in contact with. Okay, everybody. I appreciate that you came. It was nice to share a class with you. Hope you have a great week. And
thank you.
God willing, next week.
Great class.
Thank you. All the best. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.